see their own videos.
Nope.
Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. And we will be diving into intentional growth. And as Michael kept saying, he talked about growing, and we're going to be talking about growing value specifically. So as Michael had said, I grew up in a family business, and I'll give you a little bit, couple of shorter version of my full story. But my dad started the business in the 90s. He grew it up. We hit about 21 million in revenue, 115 employees. I helped turn around the business from when it was struggling after the financial crisis. And why this story is important is because as I was running the business and we were trying to figure out what to do with it, as in he didn't want it to be in the business anymore. He had different financial targets than I did. I wanted to reinvest in the business. He wanted to take money out, and we just couldn't figure out what to do with the business. So we sold it to a local competitor. The day we sold, I had to go back and I had to fire 60% of our employees because of the nature of the sale was a strategic buyer who didn't need a lot of our back office and a lot of our employees. So that was in 2014. Since then, I've spent every waking minute trying to figure out what were all the things that we could have done. And it really boiled down to education. We just didn't know how valuations worked, all of our options, and how to guide our team to help them help us accomplish our ultimate goals. So I started consulting with different business owners, helping them with the business, and started the inception of the 5 principles that we're going to be diving into today. And I also started a podcast called Intentional Growth, like Michael said, and I've interviewed about 220 people now, and 225. And it's really been my place to learn all the things that I wish I would have known, and then help others, and then also help Pat and I continue to have a pulse of what's going on in the marketplace. And then back in 2018, I went to a conference that was a 5-day, 10 hours a day training session, which is difficult for me to sit that long. And Pat was sitting next to me, so he had no choice but to listen to me. And so that was where we ended up partnering up, and he can shed a little bit more light on that part of the story.
So I'm an accountant by education trade. I live in Dayton, Ohio. Like Michael said, I had a fractional CFO services business and ended up being the CFO of a company that we sold to an ESOP and then later sold to a PE firm. And that was after we failed to sell it to a strategic buyer. So with one company in 3 years, I gained experience with selling a business in 3 different exit options. Went to work for a local PE firm that was in the process of buying companies. They were early in their existence. One of the challenges we had as a PE firm is the goal is when we buy a company is to go grow the value that the previous owner left on the table. That doesn't mean the previous owner didn't get fair value, but anytime somebody buys a company, they're looking for that value that's going to happen in the future. And one of the challenges we had was figuring out, okay, we just bought this company. What do we do first? How do we figure out where to harvest this value? So we found a tool that a gentleman in Boston had created to help evaluate the 8 functional areas of a business, which gives you an idea of where to focus on first to help grow the value. And that's where I met Ryan at the conference and the training. And yes, I did have to sit beside him for 10 hours a day, 5 days a week for 5 days. And it was, well, those would be stories for a different day, but it was good though. It was good. And I breaks and lunch and, in the evenings came to learn that what Ryan was doing with business owners to help them focus on growing the value of their business with an end in mind. And it just really resonated with me. So we teamed up and put kind of just a 2.0 version on what he had been working on for the last 5 or 6 years. And here we are today with Arkona.
And as we dive into this, the thing that we want everybody to take away, if there's one thing, is we want to help people shift their mindset away from annual income, solving for their salary and their distributions, and shifting it towards focusing on long-term value creation by growing the value of their business. So this is the one theme that is, again, the main takeaway. And what helps people do this is the 5 principles. So the 5 principles become the catalyst for that shift in the mindset. We actually had someone on one of our virtual cohorts last week say it was like taking the blue pill in the Matrix. they were able to see the zeros and ones and understand how to focus on growing the value of their business. And we'll be diving into those 5 principles throughout this presentation. But the big takeaway, the big picture is, it starts with the big picture. And what the analogy that we like to give is that a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners are building a puzzle, but it's without the picture. So you can imagine you'll eventually get it, but you're doing it with the puzzle pieces upside down, not looking at the picture. You'll get there, but it's going to be frustrating, painful, inefficient, and expensive. However, if you look at the big picture, all the different pieces can fit inside of that because you know where you're going and why you're going there. And then you can figure out a strategy on the most effective way to accomplish those goals long term. So just a quick overview of the 5 principles before we dive into them in more detail. The first one, and they go in sequential order, and you'll see as we wrap up, it'll all tie together. The first one is you have to know what you want from your business and as your legacy from an entrepreneur and why. That's crucial to be to build all the other building blocks on top of it.
So the second principle is understanding and measuring there are 3 different financial targets. One is what is the annual income you need either while you own your business or if you're thinking about an exit. And this is not exit planning, so it's not for people who are thinking about getting out in 12 or 24 months. But what annual income do you want to get out of your business? What assets have you saved outside of the value of the business that can provide you with a cash flow stream? And then thirdly, and for most every business owner that I've worked with, the most important is what's the value of your business. Most entrepreneurs and business owners have the vast majority of their net worth tied up in the value of their business. So knowing and measuring those 3 targets, both today and projecting them in the future, is just super critical in the second principle. The third principle, and while I just said it was about exits, the third principle is exit options. The reason we put that in there, every business is going to transition ownership at some time. People who own a business someday will sell the business or pass it on to their heirs, but there will be an exit option. If you understand your financial targets in principle 2, you understand the exit options that we talk about in principle number 3, then you can start to engineer strategies and activities to help you achieve the goals that you want to that you really want to accomplish that you've discovered in principle 1. This is just kind of showing where they build on each other. What you wanted in principle 1, what your financial metrics are in 2, and then what kind of exit makes the most sense to give you the most options of achieving your drivers is principle number 3.
Those 3 principles line up the foundation to then start growing value. That's why principle 4 is increasing value, because if you know what your target valuation is, your target timeline, what you want to do, you can increase the value of your company so you can have as many choices as you want. Knowing that you're driving towards some sort of way to monetize the investment that you've built in the business and make sure that you're optimizing for the role that you want within the business pre, post, and after whatever transition makes sense to you. Well, so then the 5th principle is your team of advisors, because once you can articulate what you want and why, you can hire a team that can help you optimize that plan. We're going to be getting into each one of these in more detail. Those 5 principles help you shift your mindset away from annual income to focusing on long-term value creation. And the reason that this starts with your drivers is because most people do not know what they want long-term and why. But we now have the ability with good exercises and by understanding this to be able to articulate it. So Bo Burlingham is a gentleman that I interviewed on my podcast. He was the editor of Inc. magazine for 7 years. He wrote a book called Finish Big, and he realized after 250 interviews for his book that the number one factor of happiness with the business was they understood what they wanted and they intentionally went and got it and built the plan to go grow a valuable business that satisfied their goals. So the next slide here we call the vision wheel. And the reason we call it the vision wheel is because we have this exercise in the virtual cohorts in our course to really understand what is the integration that your business has with your identity. Most people don't realize that. I mean, if I had $1 for every time that someone called me and said, I want out, and they think that the only way to get out is actually sell to a third party, and it's not the case. And then they sell it. I had a gentleman, he netted over $100 million and he was miserable. And the why behind it was because he didn't know how he was getting his sense of purpose from the business, or the fact that his legacy and the things that his customers and the employees were doing were something that was deeply tied into his identity and his sense of purpose. Each one of these areas, the business plays a part in it. So we need to articulate and identify what the degree of the sense of purpose. So the way that this works is in our material, if your sense of purpose is mainly driven from the business, we'll score it at a 0. But if it's not, if your business does not, if the business is not a main sense of your purpose, it would go outwards towards a 10. There is no right or wrong answer. It's just being able to identify these so that way you can start to plan around it and use this as a lens to make additional choices.
The purpose of the exercises in our first principle is to help you define success for yourself. I'm an accountant, so the money and the dollars and cents and the numbers are always really, really important, and we get that, and we talk about that. The attributes of working in your business or exiting it, if that's your goal, that are non-monetary are super successful, or super important to you as you define success. I've just seen so many times in my career, you get to the closing table, they sign the documents, the owner has money, but they didn't achieve any of the things that were really important to them, and they're just miserable. And some of the questions or the attributes that you want to think about, do you want to work in the business at some capacity, until you're ready to go away, or do you want to get rid of your day-to-day responsibilities? Do you want to take some chips off the table just to diversify the holdings in your net worth? Is legacy super important to you? The company that we sold to an ESOP was a third-generation family business. Legacy was super important to them. So once we figured that out, then ESOPs kind of rose to the top as an exit option. If you have a business with multiple family members, either as owners or working in the business, I promise you there are family dynamics that will come into play, that it's so much better to address early as opposed to when you get to the end. And you could probably just put their partner harmony as well. We're working with a client now where two non-related, non-family members are the owners, and they've been partners for, is it 18 years, Ryan? I forget, a long time. And they're just now figuring out they have different drivers, what's important to them. So it's good that they're going through that. Do you want to continue to build a vision for your company, or do you want to get all your cash and walk away if you're thinking about exiting? The exercises are not judgmental. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just to help reveal to you what's important so that then you can design a plan to help you give you the greatest chance of achieving those goals.
Being aware of these is so important because right now there's a lot of money on the sidelines, and there's a lot of private equity firms to talk about offering money to business owners that are out of the blue. So all of a sudden, people that had no intention of selling, whether it's COVID or an out of the blue offer, they're having to make decisions of, okay, there's a big number here, but what do I want long-term and why? What do I want with the business? What legacy do I want to live? And they hadn't thought about this. So you have to there's two sides of this coin of what do you want? And then what are the financial implications? Because what we want from someone that understands these 5 principles is to be able to articulate, I want this, and it's going to cost me this much, or I need to grow that for this long and this much in order to accomplish those. So while you have the time and energy, it's important to identify these versus when you're burnt out and you want to get out, and then all of a sudden you realize you're going to have to sacrifice the things that are most important to you in order to hit your financial targets. So we all know that once, the fluffy intangible stuff that is really real. However, we get into the next part, which everybody ends up saying, well, what does it mean to me from a numbers and money perspective? Oh, Pat, you're on mute. Sorry,
I heard some noise in my house and had to get up and close the doors to my office. Sorry about that. These are the 3 financial targets we talked about. What's your ideal income as a business owner currently, or if you're thinking about selling it, after the sale? What's your net worth outside of the business, and what's the value of your business itself? This is really important to do. We have a client who had he had his net worth statement. He had $7 million on his net worth statement for the value of his business, and his financial planner said, "You're fine, nothing to worry about given your lifestyle." After working on some of the concepts that we talk about and going through the calculations, if he were to sell his business, first of all, it wasn't worth $7 million. That was an inflated number. And secondly, after paying off his debt and his taxes, he would have had about $2.4 million. Not making fun of $2.4 million, but that wasn't going to be sufficient to satisfy what he needs. So measuring and monitoring these financial targets today and in the future are just critically important for you to be able to succeed at what you want to achieve.
And I'm going to interject a short story there about that client, because it's interesting as we walk through the rest of the principles, how they all tie together. So after that individual, they had a manufacturing firm that still do, that's about 11 million in revenue, 1.2 in EBITDA, which we'll talk about a little bit, but it's cash flow. And they wanted to, after they realized that they were only going to make $2.4 million, if that individual needed to sell, they would have had to sacrifice a lot of their things in the first principle. The individual is really, really legacy driven. They've sent 60 couples of their employees to Tony Robbins Unleash the Power Within. Just really, really, his identity is tied up into the business, and it brings him a lot of happiness. So last thing he wanted to do was sell to a strategic buyer where he had to squeeze every dollar out of it. The good news is, after he had learned these concepts, he said, I'm going to grow the value of my business. So he focused on de-risking his company, the cash flow, increasing the value so he could have more choices and increase his options. And that's what we're going to be talking about. And this is why having energy and identifying these numbers, even though you don't want to sell it, helps you measure and monitor so you can focus on the right things. So in that example with that client, as he'd realized, what is my target income that I want? So, right now, if you're making a salary from your business and if you're taking out distributions or some other kind of investment income, you have an annual income that is satisfying your lifestyle needs. And the business plays a part in that as it currently stands as the owner. By identifying what you want from your annual cash flow and then also your outside investments, you can understand this big, huge question mark. This is where my dad and I were. We didn't know what the business meant to us net if we didn't have it. And this is a calculation that too many people don't run until they're at the deal table and they realize that they're way too far away. Like Pat's example, if that individual would have had to sell, they would have had to sacrifice the first principles. They wouldn't have made enough money. And I, no joke, at this current day, have an email in my inbox from an owner that sold. And he said, do you have any podcasts that are for business owners that didn't make enough to retire and need to go back and hustle, but have a 10-year non-compete? And that's the risk. So we want to be able to do this work while we have energy to create more choices. So once we identify this question mark, then we can focus on the things that we can control, which is the beautiful part about this concept.
So that slide before was Ryan's visionary graphical representation of life, and the next slide is my spreadsheet representation of life. So
this is a crayon version of what Pat normally does.
Depending on your learning preference, we wanted to show it each way. So this is just an example. If somebody had a target income after tax of $200,000, and that would mean they had pre-tax if you had a 30% tax rate of $285,000. If this person had assets that were income producing, so this is not 100 acres of farmland that sits idle that may be worth a lot of money but not producing any cash flow. These are income producing assets outside the business of 2 million. And if you use the age-old percentage of 4%, which is a pretty good percentage in my opinion for what you can take out and still preserve your principal, you could see down below where you'd have investment income of 80,000. In our example, they had some rental income and some other income that they generated from consulting. which meant they had $135,000 worth of income coming in. That leaves a shortfall from the $285,000 of $150,000. At the 4% mark of taking that out and preserving your principal, they need another $3.75 million in investable income producing assets in order to generate that $285,000. We do this because these things can be calculated. Things change, markets go up and down. We all realize that, but so many business owners, and what we're trying to help people solve for is don't be in the dark about this. Do the math, get the information, get evaluation of your business, figure out what these numbers are, solve this equation, because it is really a math equation, and figure out what would I need to get if I sold my business net after everything, debt and taxes, in order to generate the target income that I need in order to sustain my lifestyle. And if your business is not worth that today, then start solving for that. We'll get into that in a later principle. But that's a long way of saying, know your numbers and do the work to get this information and solve this, this equation so that you can truly understand where you stand today compared to where you want to be.
And these can all be calculated without selling the business. This should be done no matter what. And we spend a lot of time in that in the online course, but also we're going to be doing the second round of this webinar series. We're going to be diving into the numbers, valuations, how they work, and how to really see inside the numbers as it relates to the business on this stuff. But this number right here, once you start with this baseline, you can make other choices of, do you actually want to keep that money, pass it on, or if you want to burn through it before, we actually had a client that said, I want to bounce a check when the last nail in the coffin's going. Those are just different decisions that you can run on top of the baseline, but you have to have a baseline to then be able to weigh those different decisions and choices that are coming across. So that way, if you fill this question mark of my graphic here, that's where choices come in. Where again, going back to that client of ours, they might say, you know what, I'm going to pass this business on to my kids for a discounted price, or I'm going to do all these different things we're going to talk about in Principle 3. But the choices come from where you don't have to make sacrifices that you didn't intend to do because you need to financially. That's where real choices come in. And again, that's about identifying these numbers today and then focusing on the right things. That's where the word intentional comes from, and the long-term value creation. So that way you don't just double your revenue and not create a more valuable business. The good news is, there's a lot of different ways to increase that value gap or shrink that value gap, I should say. You can save more money over time. You can increase how much you would take home if you sold the business. Each exit option will impact the enterprise value of the business and when and how you get your money. Or with all these, you could focus on increasing the value of the business because your strategies are intentional by de-risking your cash flow. So we're going to have Pat just quickly go over this just to clarify a couple topics before we dive into principle number 3.
We go into this a lot more in our live boot camps or in the course, but we just want to touch base on it because there's a lot of different words thrown around about value. Enterprise value is the common term that's a technical term for what is commonly referred to as purchase price, top line value. Somebody says, I sold my business for $5 million. That's what they mean. And the next one is equity value. That is the amount of your enterprise value less what we call net debt. Net debt is, if you own your business, the funded debt, the debt to the bank or places like that, less any cash. When people sell their business or value their business, you subtract the cash and you have to pay off the debt, but you get to keep the cash. So that's why we call it net debt. You subtract that from enterprise value and you get to what's called equity value. If you think about your home and you have a home that's listed on the marketplace is worth $400,000, that's the enterprise value. But if you owed $300,000 on it, that would be the net debt. Cash wouldn't come into play there. And so the equity value of your home is $100,000. That's the analogous example to what it is in the valuation world. It's really important to understand these when you're talking to professionals or thinking about your business. There's actually one step further we don't go into here much because of just time constraints. Equity value is not what goes into your bank account. You know, you have to pay taxes on that, and you have to pay, you know, transaction costs and things like that. So it's just critically important to understand these as you think about strategies to grow the value of your business. And like Ryan said, there are different ways to grow the value of your business, but the ultimate objective is to increase the net proceeds, which would go into your account if you sold the business. We just keep reiterating, this is not about selling your business, but if you can say, today my net proceeds would be X if I sold, but I deploy these strategies and embark on this path that in 5 years or 10 years or whatever, my net proceeds would be 2X, 3X, 4X, whatever that might be. That's what you want to be thinking about when you're thinking about growing value.
It's just like your house. In Pat's example, just to translate this back to the client example, that business owner's financial advisor and him had put $7 million, which was an incorrect enterprise value. The business was actually worth 5.5. So they put the enterprise value on there. They didn't consider the debt or the taxes. So he thought he was free, kind of just, you know, doing things the way he has always done them. But then when he ran these calculations, again, which we are going to talk about more in the second webinar, as well as the cohort, but he calculated it to get to 2.4 and said, oh my gosh, I've got a lot of work to do. And then he focused on specific things that he's on track. He's already paid down over $1 million in debt the last 12 months. And he's implementing strategies to increase that $5.5 million to 12 million before he makes a decision. So again, he just became aware of this so he could focus on the right things. So now we get to, now that we know what we want and why, what are our financial targets today and where do we need to be marching towards, we can start looking at the different exit options. And the reason that we cover this, like Pat said, it's not about selling today. It's about understanding these, because someone in our boot camp said, if you don't understand these, a lot of entrepreneurs get into running a business because they like freedom, control, the autonomy, making their own decisions, and success or failure, whatever comes with it. But in this situation, by not understanding these options, someone else has got the pad and the paper, or the pad of paper and the pen, and they're writing your narrative for you. This is about taking that back and saying, this is what I eventually want. And it could be 10, 20 years down the road. We just got off a client call yesterday with a woman that owns 6 daycares, and she's 10 plus years out, but she's doing very specific things, knowing that she's going to march towards an option that is going to help her accomplish all of her first and second principles. And the reason I throw this Rubik's Cube up is so many times out of hundreds of interviews, it's been validated every time that entrepreneurs, they think of kind of like 2 different options. One is transition the business to some internal manager, partner, or family member, long drawn out, not profitable, or it could be very complicated, or sell it to a strategic buyer that they can articulate who it is. Those are definitely options, but there's so many in between, and each one of these options is going to impact your first and second principles dramatically, and it becomes like a Rubik's Cube, because you can almost design the exact thing that you want if you got time to grow value to go accomplish it. Pat, you want to jump into our favorite topic?
Oh, okay. One of the concepts that we like to talk with owners about is separating the idea in their own mind between their role as an owner of a business and their role as management in the business, whether you're the CEO, the COO, whatever your role might be. So many times people conflate those 2 roles, ownership and management, and try and solve all kinds of problems related to those, whether it be family problems or not problems, but family issues and things like that. Separating those in your mind will really help provide clarity on how to proceed. As an owner, you're entitled to return on your investment and your ownership in the business. You set that aside mentally, you compartmentalize that, and you say, as a person who's running the company, say you're the CEO, what is my management role? What do I need to do for the business? What's fair compensation? You know, just how do I act in that role? We put these graphics here, and I'm the one who put the words freeloader on there on the right. So we have clients who do solve family issues by having people on the payroll who don't do anything. I don't advise that. I understand it. But it complicates things, and you can be an owner and work in the business. You can be an owner and not work in the business, you know, and then you can be a family member who's not an owner but yet works in the business. I mean, it can just get the matrix can just get really complicated. Separating those in your mind will really help you distinguish as you're making decisions and developing strategies about how to take your company forward to grow value. So we spend a lot more time on this in the course, but it's just, we want to plant this seed that as you think about growing the value of your business with an end in mind, you have to separate these two things mentally.
The only way to answer the question that I hear all the time is when I hear I want out in 5 years or tomorrow and 10, and I just go, what do you mean? Out from what? And then it's usually a lot of times it goes towards, I'm burnt out. I'm sick of playing adult daycare. I'm sick of doing insurance and all these things that are job responsibilities that if you are focusing on it, you could actually hire that away and not liquidate your investment in the business. Both of these different paths, management roles, your W-2 salary and your company equity and value, can be transitioned completely separate in different timelines with different things. And it's crucial to understand principles 1 and 2 before you start making these decisions, because you could truly keep working in the business and being the strategic CEO for decades to come while liquidating your ownership equity and vice versa. And we're going to show you how each of these options impact each of these a little bit differently. So I'm going to cover the first couple, and then Pat will cover 3 and 4, and then I'll wrap it up with 5. So we broke the exit options down into 5 buckets. There are almost an infinite amount of possibilities by combining all these different topics, but they truly fall into one of these areas, and then they're just kind of subcategories. An internal transfer is between family members, partners, and managers, and the business is going to have to self-fund. The cash flow from the company is going to have to fund most of that buyout, whether it's a combination of some bank financing or some seller financing. There's a lot of implications that come with that, and there's a lot of things that we talk about that are in our course called the attributes. We created this list of attributes of control over the process, the intensity of due diligence of someone, really tearing through every single minute detail of the business, and whether it's low, medium, or high probability of each of those attributes happening. So inside of these exit options, by thinking about how does my internal transfer impact the valuation that I need, and how does it impact my role, and when and how I get my money. By understanding that, you can start planning to march towards one of these and prioritizing one versus the other. Or I think one of the biggest factors of success is elimination, just saying these are never going to work for me, so let's not even talk about them or even entertain them at any given point. The second exit option is what we call acquisition entrepreneurs. What this is it's a couple of different combinations, but in Minnesota here, we have 17 public companies. There could be someone from 3M or from Best Buy or Target that ran a $100 million P&L of a company, saved a bunch of money, and wants to go buy a job, buy the local garage door company that's doing $4 million in revenue, and become not only the CEO, but also the new owner. They take out a loan, they can go buy it, and now they have essentially become free of the corporate world. Another version of this is a family office that backs an MBA student. So it might be someone that has a very large pool of investments, and they say, you know what, Gina wants to go buy a company. She doesn't have enough of her own investments. We're going to back her instead of the bank, and we're going to go, we're betting on Gina and her skill sets in XYZ industry. And so just understanding the difference between this and what we'll talk about in exit option number 4, just understanding it is crucial, because then you could say, yes, it makes sense. No, it doesn't. And generally this person's going to need to keep the main infrastructure, but it's going to be their business. They're going to have different visions of what they want to do with it long-term. So this acquisition entrepreneur might impact your personal drivers on principle 1 different than an internal transfer. And again, it's about weighing those choices back and forth.
The third exit option that we discuss is an ESOP, employee stock ownership plan. This is where the owner sells their ownership to an ESOP trust, where the employees are the beneficial owners of the trust and actually then become the owners of the company. This is, in my opinion, one of the least understood exit options that are out there, but it can really go a long way towards solving a lot of the principle 1 aspects, your drivers that seem in conflict with each other. For example, I want to take chips off the table, but I love my industry and want to continue to have a role in my company. So a lot of times people think it's a either or choice, and it's not. ESOPs, if you're a pass-through entity like an S Corp and you sell 100% of your stock to the ESOP, the company and the owner no longer pay income taxes on the money that the company earns. So, what?
Say it again.
You stop paying income taxes. That's the purpose that Congress put it in the IRS code, is to incentivize people to do this. Eventually down the road, when the employees take the money out, it becomes taxed at ordinary tax rates. But the year-to-year income that the company earns, there's no tax being paid on it. So it is a leverage buyout. The company borrows the money to buy out the owner, but you can just imagine if you no longer had to pay income tax, how quickly you could pay that tax down. So this is a structure that can be super beneficial in certain circumstances. It's not for everybody, but it's, like I said, in my opinion, it's the least understood option. But when we go into it more in the course and in the boot camp, I have to tell you, this is probably the topic that gets the most questions and the most attention from the audience. So and if you Google ESOP and problems, you're going to get 1 million hits. And there have been some horror stories in the past, but it's way more sophisticated today in its structure, and you don't have all those problems. So it's one of the, in my opinion, one of the more attractive options. The fourth one is private equity, where that's a group of people who start a private equity firm and they go and raise money from investors. They take that money, invest and buy companies with the sole purpose of getting a return for their investors. That is why they do it. It's some people become wealthy and they want to invest outside of the public stock markets and trying to get a better return in the private markets. So they do that. It can be a real positive for a company where the business owner just really needs to get out. The company's been starved for investment, whether it's in capital or people. A private equity firm can step in and ring the cash register for the business owner, invest money in the company to help it grow into the future. There are just a ton of questions that somebody should ask if they've been approached. And if you're on the call and you're a business owner, chances are you've been approached by a private equity firm. You have to understand how long the firm's been around, how long the fund's been around, how many years do they have left in the runway. Are you a platform company? Are you a bolt-on company? What's their hurdle rate? They're just a ton of questions. And if you can educate yourself as to how it works, then you can have a really good conversation with the potential buyer in a PE firm and increase your likelihood of a success if you go down that route. There's some horror stories where people sell to PE firms and after the fact, they're like, I didn't realize it was going to be this way, because a lot of times they stick around to run the company and they even roll some of their proceeds into the investment. So our main point here is in the course and in the boot camp is to educate people about how it works. We run through some examples, even on the math, because you can't go too long in a course without doing math or what's the purpose of it, in my opinion. So but then just to arm you with some education and some questions to ask so that you can have an intelligent conversation with somebody and you're on more of a level playing field. These are professionals at buying companies. They know what they're doing. Generally, they're good at it. And before he says it, Ryan's going to say, if you've seen one, you've seen one, because they're all different. They all have different approaches to how they do it, but their sole purpose is to get a return for their investors.
And to put some numbers behind it, there are like 3,900, a little bit more than that, public companies. There are over 8,000 private equity backed companies. That's a lot. So these are professionals and they have one goal is to get a rate of return. And they usually are taking what the business owner had been using as a lifestyle business for solving for annual income. And then they buy it, use the cash flow from the company to reinvest into the things that the business owner chose not to or didn't have the time or energy to do. The fifth exit option is strategic buyers. We don't have to talk much about these because most people understand them. It's their competitors up and down the supply chain, different geographic location, just the typical cast of characters that most entrepreneurs think of when they think so-and-so should buy my company. It's either someone internally or some of their competitors. Every one of these exit options will impact principles number 1 and 2 in a completely different way. So by understanding what do you want and why, the timing and all the things that are important, you can hold those as core values to you and using those as a lens for your strategic plan. And then you can focus on growing the value of your business so you can accomplish the things that are important to you. Going back to that story that Pat and I were talking about. So that business owner, now they want to go from 1.2 in EBITDA and at a $5.5 million valuation to a $2 million EBITDA at a $12 million valuation. Because if they did that, which their plan is in 36 months to do that, which this is, and it's real math and it happens all the time. They paid down $1.2 million in debt. They're able to grow value through the strategies that we're going to talk about in the next principle. And then they can do an ESOP and not have to sacrifice all their personal objectives. So by understanding these things, it puts very solid focus and clarity so you can be intentional with where you're spending your time, money, and energy in the business. So now, as you can see, as we've built up the foundation to understanding these things, so that way you can focus on the right ways to grow value.
So the goal of your business should be to create sustainable, predictable, and transferable cash flow. That is what determines the value of any business. I don't care if you're a local pizza shop owner or you're Apple. People are buying future cash flows when they buy a business. And to the degree that your cash flow is sustainable into the future, predictable, and transferable to somebody else, your value will go up. So that is the goal of strategies in this principle in order to increase those 3 aspects of your cash flow.
Great example is real estate. So sustainable, predictable, and transferable value in a business is equal to walk-in ready for a house. So in our course and in our boot camp, we talk about 2 businesses that are 10 million in revenue and $1 million in EBITDA. And they're worth significantly different. And that translates into this real estate example where you have 2 houses, same square footage, same amount of beds and baths, same school district and lot size. One's over double the value because someone can buy that house and walk in and live there. In a business, the more transferable, predictable, and sustainable your cash flow is, a new investor can buy that cash flow and then continue to ride that wave into the future. And so now, how do we translate everybody could probably, with some common sense, articulate what it needs to be done on the house on the left. In a business, it's not as clear, but there's some tools that we use to make this easy to identify and then focus on. And that's about reducing company-specific risk, which is the internal operations of the business.
So we use a tool where we measure the 8 functional areas of a business, and we're going to be really cognizant of everybody's time here. There are 8 different ones. To the degree these aren't level and at a certain level. So if operations, you came up through and you're an operator and your operations just are humming and you score 100% on this, that's one thing. But if if you don't have good financials, if your leadership skills aren't up to speed or your sales and marketing activity is not good, you have risk. To the degree these aren't even, and up to a certain degree, you have risk in your business that your cash flow is not sustainable, predictable, and transferable. So you need to measure these so that you know what to work on first. You can't do 10 things well at one time. And this is the tool that the gentleman developed that Ryan and I met at the conference. But this is just an important concept to de-risk your business. Because again, I'm going to repeat it one more time. If you de-risk your business, you increase the sustainability, predictability, and transferability of your cash flow, and you drive up the value of your business. That is the core of what we're trying to get across to business owners when it comes to growing the value of their business with an end in mind.
And we're, like Pat said, we're going to be conscious of everybody's time, but just to quickly show you, what do these different functional areas mean? There are two companies right here, Summit Manufacturing and Jordan Tool and Die, that we give examples of in our material, but I think you can have some solid take homes that if they're both 10 million in sales and $1 million in EBITDA, one goes for, and so in our example in the course, Jordan Tool and Die is about half the price of enterprise value Summit, because Summit has passive ownership. The business owner has worked themselves out of the business, versus Jordan, the company is completely reliant on the business owner. The Summit has raving fans. Oh, I'm sorry, that's down here, number 8. Has a diversified customer base, versus in Jordan Tool and Die, 2 clients make up 75%. So there's risk if one of those clients leave that the cash flow is not there. The management team on Summit is growth minded and strategic, versus Jordan Tool and Die, they're low performing. And then the last one is the financials. Pat, I'm stealing your thunder here.
Yeah, but I think they get the idea here. You know, customer concentration. That's something that has risk. So let's make sure we cover all the principles. So I think that's enough.
The point is transferable cash flow, which will increase the value of the business to hit your financial targets and create more exit options. So the 5th principle, which we'll wrap up with, is the team of advisors. This is about, so this is how I felt right before, years before we sold the business. All these advisors coming in, giving us good ideas, but having no plan let us confuse and say, oh, that's a great tax strategy, or maybe an ESOP, or maybe this strategic planning, but we never had something to pull it all together. And the point of these 5 principles is they become a blueprint that allow you to go sit down with your advisors, consultants and internal, to say, this is what I want and why, like that example of our client. Now everybody can help optimize the financial plan, the tax plan, the strategic plan to help that client increase the probability that they're going to get what they want. And so in the course, we talk about all the different questions that you should ask these advisors. And the big key part is no egos, understanding how they all get paid, and that they do work in valuations and in business, and they're not just, the H&R Block tax preparer that doesn't know how to deal with businesses. This is about really having the people that get it, want it, and have the capacity to help you as a business owner and optimize your plan. The point is choices and freedom, and the freedom that comes with choices. And as we wrap up, exactly on time, we can open up for questions if we want. Otherwise, we've got the kickoff on the virtual cohort coming up on January 28th. But I think with that being said, I can tee it back up to the Metro Chamber.
Awesome, Pat and Ryan. Thank you so much. I was going to mention too in the intro that the Chamber is all about the 3 C's. We have the state of Arizona has the 5 C's, and we at the Chamber have the 3 C's. Those C's being champion, which relates to our advocacy efforts, catalyst, which relates to our workforce development, talent attraction efforts, and connector. And this is where I think this really comes in. We want to connect businesses to each other, but we also want to connect businesses to programs that will help grow their business. So appreciate this. I would open it up to questions. I know we're sort of at the hour mark, but if there are any questions, quick questions that folks have, I'd be certainly interested in having those be asked and have Ryan and Pat respond to them. It's a shy group today.
People can hide behind. We had a client that had a cardboard cutout of himself, so you didn't have to sit in front of it.
Wow.
One of the things that I just wanted to throw out, being from Tucson, is that for any of the participants, is that in Tucson right now, my clients and other folks I know's clients and people who are members of the chamber, what we're seeing a lot of right now is private equity firms doing a lot of unsolicited offers, trying to roll up businesses, looking for businesses to acquire, to roll up into sort of large regional or national groups. And this is everything from handyman services to trades, landscaping, insurance group. I mean, just anything that you can imagine that could be rolled up. And so I think if you think that you're not a target, an acquisition target, I think you might be underestimating who's looking for you right now, because there is so much opportunity, so many private equity firms out there. Is that what you're seeing, Ryan and Pat, across the country right now?
Yeah, there's a lot of money out there that's looking for a home for investment. And so larger PE firms who used to stop at a certain size company, they wouldn't go below that because they didn't just think it was worth their time. They're going further down the ladder on size in order to find investment. So I agree with you 100%. No one should be surprised if they get approached by a PE firm.
And they don't have to, like, you know, it's kind of like if you were to go knock on someone's house that you want to buy, you're going to throw out like a number, but you don't have to commit to it, you know, because then it's up to the appraisal to make sure that it gets valued at what you need it to be. So they have these unsolicited offers. They throw out a dollar amount. Doesn't mean you're getting it all up front of what they're going to do with it. And the key to this, and I'm obviously biased, is knowing what you want, what your company's worth. You can send some information over and say, here's what I want, why I want it, either yes or no, or move on or get it out of my face. It's the destruction that happens with distraction is hard to quantify sometimes. We have some people that were in through a last boot camp that 22 months, but $500,000, and they didn't sell the PE. So now they're having to get their energy back, focus on the right things. So it's okay to, you know, to entertain those offers as long as you can articulate to everybody what you want.
I think having a business broker or someone will help walk you through that is extremely important. The PE guys have done it a gazillion times, and you need somebody on your team with that level of expertise to guide you through the process so you don't waste your time.
And I would just add to that, you need to, as a business person, need to understand it at a certain level as well. So you can have a conversation with your advisor, you know, and the more you know, the better off you'll be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even on that note, there's a whole section in our material that, I mean, the difference between brokers and investment bankers, and then how to even hire one, because they have different motives, different compensation structures. And I mean, there's a lot to it. And this is where, you know, to steal Pat's phrases, we're not trying to make anybody financial engineers or, you know, perfect on all this knowledge. It's just so you can ask why to all the people that you're going to surround yourself with. Why are you getting paid? Why is the company worth this? What are the different options? Then you can use the rest of your experience to connect all the dots.
Agreed.
Okay. So I believe we have another session on December 2nd from 11 to 12:30. Sort of part 2 of this, but as you showed on your last slide, January 28th is really when this kicks off, 10% discount for those chamber members. We are going to continue to push this out to our membership, try to get people signed up. We see great value in this. I was extremely impressed with this presentation. I really look forward to the next one because it will have even more great information. December 2nd is my 20th anniversary. My wife and my 20th anniversary. So maybe there will be something in there that I could use. Well, maybe not.
Yeah.
Especially not the exit strategy, right? Definitely don't want to talk about any sort of exit strategy. But really appreciate your time, Pat and Ryan. Look forward to that session. Look forward to the boot camp in January. And thank you very much. And if there's nothing else, then really appreciate everyone's time, and we will see you soon.
Take care. Thank you.
Nice seeing everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.